first speaker today is Alena Pacheco, who last year when she wrote this paper was a freshman, is currently a sophomore. And last I looked, she was majoring in psychology, despite my best efforts in her case and everyone else to turn people to philosophy. And Alena is going to be talking on Penelope in Homer's Odyssey. It's yours.
Okay, I know the flyer says that it was called The Trophy That Is Penelope, but there was a title change. I changed it to Loyalty Woven with Weakness. Okay. Penelope, the woman a great war hero leaves his goddess lover for. So desirable that over 100 of Ithaca's finest young suitors seek her hand, the ideal Greek woman. Penelope is sought after for her status as queen and her legendary beauty. Yet she is depicted as nothing more than Odysseus' trophy wife and a potential prize given to the winning suitor. Penelope is known only for her beauty and loyalty, making her the perfect subservient wife to any Greek man of the time. Her suitors prey upon the fact that she is hospitable, kind, and flawless despite her sorrow. Though Penelope is strong enough to hold off the suitors for a few years, they take advantage of her inferior position as a female and rudely help themselves to everything Odysseus has left her, slowly destroying her home. Throughout his travels, Odysseus remarks how anxious he is to get home, yet he seldom mentions returning to Penelope. Rather, he wants to be immortalized in a song. When offered immortality by Calypso in exchange for his freedom, Odysseus opts to remain mortal and take his chances voyaging home. That way, if and when Odysseus finally gets his homecoming, his legacy will live on forever in an epic poem. Odysseus does not really care for his wife nearly as much as he cares about getting his song and metaphorical immortality. Though Penelope is a weak and two-dimensional character, she signifies home for Odysseus, if only as an extension of his glory. Notably, Penelope's character seems to revolve around her constant objectification. Not only is she reduced to a trophy by her husband and suitors, Penelope objectifies herself before the archery contest. She tells her suitors, "Here is a prize set out before you," implying the prize for the archery contest to be her hand in marriage. Penelope embraces and renews the objectification placed upon her by the suitors. This is actually the second time Penelope's hand has been offered as a prize for a contest. Her marriage to Odysseus took place after he beat her father in a foot race, winning her hand. By passively allowing the demeaning label of prize to continue, Penelope displays her character as weak and submissive. As the ideal trophy wife for a potentially dead war hero, Penelope embodies several qualities that make her desirable. The hospitable nature of Penelope, an attractive trait she possesses, actually serves as a crippling weakness as she allows the suitors to damage the house. While generous and welcoming to her young suitors, Penelope is unable to prevent them from draining the wealth from the home that she shares with her son. Antinous voices his opinion to Telemachus. Penelope is winning a great name for herself, but for you she is causing much loss of substance. Though kind Penelope is in charge of the house and Telemachus is her only son, Antinous refers to the possessions they share as belonging to Telemachus alone. He admires Penelope's generosity while warning Telemachus that his substance is being lost. Penelope's praiseworthy hospitality is in fact a detriment to the dynamics of her son's magnificent household. The most prominent characteristic of Penelope is her undying faith to Odysseus. This devotion makes her a much sought-after prize for the suitors, as the young men believe Penelope's devotion to Odysseus will translate into a further relationship with one of them. For 20 years, Penelope has remained chaste in hopes of Odysseus returning home from the Trojan War to Ithaca. Though she resists the suitors, Penelope never directly tries to expel them offensively due to her inferior role as a woman. She only delays their advances through her defensive scheme. According to Amphimedon, Penelope constructs a devious conspiracy to buy time for Odysseus to return. Promising to choose a suitor after she completes her weaving, Penelope weaves a burial shroud for Laertes during the day and unravels it at night unbeknownst to the suitors. Instead of actively trying to do something about the suitors, she leads the young men on with her weaving. Antinous tells Telemachus, "Penelope holds out hope to all and makes promises to each man, sending us messages." Rather than giving the suitors a definitive answer, or perhaps seeking help from her family, Penelope continues to play along with the courting and destruction of her home. She keeps the suitors waiting for her decision, though she has no intention of marrying any of them. Perhaps she hopes her beauty and desirability will disintegrate with time, and the young suitors will leave voluntarily. Penelope blatantly ignores the possibility that Odysseus may never return from his travels, and simply stalls, expecting him to return and rescue her from the suitors. At both ends of the epic, Penelope is portrayed as an objectified, grieving widow, dwelling on her past. She weeps over her husband's absence in the beginning, when she tells the singer, "But leave off singing this sad song, which always afflicts the dear herd deep inside me, since the unforgettable sorrow comes to me, beyond others. So dear a head do I long for whenever I am reminded of my husband." It is implied that Odysseus left for the Trojan War, shortly after winning Penelope's hand in a race and having Telemachus, so he and Penelope had been married less than 3 years prior to his departure. Her brief marriage to Odysseus does not seem to match the extent to which Penelope is grieving, proving how underdeveloped her character is. Though Odysseus has been missing for 20 years, Penelope continues to lament daily, tortured by the memories of her husband, to whom she had been married only a short amount of time, a marriage she had no say in. Again, Penelope is portrayed as weak and vulnerable as she prepares for the archery contest, when she sat down and laid the bow on her dear knees, while she took her lord's bow out of its case, all the while weeping aloud. Even as she begins a tournament through which she plans to pick a new husband, she weeps for Odysseus. The melodrama of Penelope's character carries across the entire epic. After everything she's been through, Penelope does not seem to have been strengthened by her experiences, as her character goes through absolutely no development. She is still the weepy widow she was at the beginning of the tale. Though Penelope's timeline lasts only about a month, her character stays relatively the same throughout the whole poem, a painfully two-dimensional, grieving widow loyal to an absent husband. Alternatively, the character of Clytemnestra serves as Penelope's foil and helps to emphasize her only qualities, loyalty and chastity. Both women have their integrity put to the test when their warrior husbands depart for the Trojan War. Men pursue each woman in her husband's absence, though the women respond differently. While Penelope remains faithful to Odysseus, Clytemnestra is seduced and succumbs to temptation. Upon Agamemnon's return with a new woman, Clytemnestra assists in his murder alongside her lover. Unlike Clytemnestra, Penelope is very tolerant of Odysseus' multiple affairs, embracing them almost and viewing them as a compliment to herself. As Odysseus tells her of his travels, including his affairs, she listened to him with delight. She clearly takes pride in the fact that her husband chose to leave a string of goddess lovers to return home to her. By being foiled by Clytemnestra, Penelope appears even more virtuous and desirable. Clytemnestra's faults serve as a stark contrast to Penelope's character and emphasize her only traits of loyalty and chastity. Despite the two-dimensionality and delicacy of Penelope's character, her actions are understandable and praised for a woman of the time period. Penelope's grief and objectivity, while irritating, were common in the culture of ancient Greece. Penelope was actually bestowed to Odysseus after he had defeated her father in a foot race, and this was considered acceptable. Women were to behave in a customary manner, and Penelope's subservience to the suitors and her husband was typical. Because of the cultural standards applied to men and women, and though Odysseus had a string of affairs, Penelope was expected to remain chaste and wait for her husband to return from war. However, the amount of time that had elapsed since the conclusion of the war demanded that Penelope take another man. Penelope's virtue is so admirable that Agamemnon provides her immortality by means of an epic. His soul says, "Thereby the fame of her virtue shall never die away, but the immortals will make for the earth, people of the earth, a thing of grace and a song for prudent Penelope." Clearly, Penelope's virtue is just as important as Odysseus' whole journey, since she receives a song as well. The morality of Penelope was so great that she receives the highest honor of a poem. By remaining loyal and virtuous, even when all seemed to be lost, Penelope was regarded as godlike and praised by all of Greece, eventually eternalized in her own song. Still, it is understandable how Penelope had to use her mind and appearance to manipulate the suitors, since she could not overpower them physically or force them to leave. Since her son was too young to help drive out the suitors, Penelope had to take matters into her own hands and beguile them instead. Using her cleverness and knowledge of Greek tradition, Penelope was able to pit the suitors against each other while simultaneously creating more time for Odysseus to return. Penelope had no other choice but to bide her time by leading the suitors on with individual promises. By sending out separate messages to each of her suitors, Penelope guaranteed that they would not utilize their advantageous numbers to band together and force a marriage decision out of her or cause any physical harm. This ensured both her and Telemachus' safety. Also, her strategy to weave and unweave a burial shroud for Laertes bought her time and safety until Odysseus could return. Ancient Greek culture demanded a body to be wrapped in a shroud before burial, and the suitors would not have dared to break religious tradition. The suitors respected the Greek mythology too much to interfere with Penelope's weaving of the burial shroud for her father-in-law. Exploiting the suitors' strong faith in the gods, Penelope kept them at arm's length and protected herself and her son. Though Penelope's character is tragically underdeveloped, she is reconcilably essential to the story. The entire poem revolves around Odysseus' return to Penelope and her role with the suitors. By signifying home for Odysseus, she provides a beacon of hope to him, an inspiration for him to return, even if only as an extension of his fame. The entire course of the story would be altered without her existence. Also, Odysseus probably would not have had a home to come back to without Penelope deviously keeping the suitors at bay. If Odysseus had left for Troy without an adult behind to run Ithaca, his home and kingdom would have been swiftly conquered, plunging Ithaca into chaos. With Telemachus too young to defend the house, Penelope's existence, while fragile, prevented Odysseus' home from being sacked. Penelope's role in preserving the Ithacan crown was essential. The queen's presence retained a ruler on Ithaca's throne, even if only to hold it until Telemachus came of age or Odysseus returned. Penelope ensured Ithaca would not see a mad scramble for power without a leader by guarding the crown. By providing stability to both her home and entire country, Penelope redeems her weak, underdeveloped character and has an essential role in the epic tale of Homer's Odyssey.
Very good, thank you. So I assume some people, before we get to Professor Berger, will have comments or questions, so we should open the floor up.
Maybe I should start with another question.
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
So I could. Agamemnon praises Penelope
Yes.
and suggests there's a song that's going to be sung about her. And of course, Odysseus himself wants a song to be sung about himself. We have this poem called the Odyssey. Is it a song about both of them? Is it what Agamemnon promises will be forthcoming, a song about them? Or is it just a song about Odysseus?
I wrote this paper at 3 a.m, but I think it's mostly about Odysseus, though, but the entire course of the poem is steered around Penelope. I said in the paper it would have been entirely different. Just the fact that Odysseus' timeline is a lot more vast than Penelope's, it shows more of the development with his character and how it was entirely about his quest. Also, it's called the Odyssey. But I really think Penelope was a critical part. So in a way, the poem was about her, but mostly about Odysseus, in my opinion.
Professor Thomas.
More questions, yeah.
So, thanks for your paper. It's great. At the end, the last few paragraphs of the paper, you suggest that Penelope's really been effective and important and even clever. And I think there's signals early in the Odyssey. You don't have yours in front of you, so it's not fair, but even in book 2, when Antinous is yelling at Telemachus and saying, it's your fault that we're eating you out of house and home. Your mother's just too fabulous. We can't leave her alone. And when he describes Penelope, he doesn't say she's pretty and she's passive and she's loyal. In fact, they don't want her to be loyal. What he says is her talent for handiwork, her good sense, her cleverness, all that go beyond that of any of the heroines of old, Tiro, Alcmene, Garland, and Monkey. I mean, basically, none of them had a mind like Penelope's, right? So even from the suitor, what's making Penelope overwhelming is her mind, which is maybe surprising. So I guess I'm wondering how you put together this sort of defense of Penelope from the end of your paper with the pretty harsh criticisms of the first 2/3 where she's just passive. Because it looks to me like the stuff at the end of your paper suggests that maybe the passivity is a part of the plan rather than just all there is to her. That maybe she's a lot more, even in your paper, a lot more three-dimensional than that first part suggests. So I just wonder what you think about that.
I just think that passivity kind of overshadows everything else. Just the constant loyalty to Odysseus is not really helping her in any way. Yes. there is more to her, but not enough, in my opinion. Just all of the constant, the sorrow, the melodrama. It's too much to be working in her favor, the way I see it.
And
My question kind of is both reversed in mine, but in a much more simple way. I was wondering, so there's a paragraph where you're talking about kind of cultural norms of both like women and men and gender roles, and do you think that maybe like this passive character that she begins as, or as a paper like starts off saying, do you think that she really works within that passivity though, and finds agency somehow by producing these norms, but in her favor?
I just wrote this incredibly biased as like a 21st century person. I found her passivity irritating. At the time period, it was totally normal. But when I did the character analysis, I thought of it as a person of today, and not with the assigned gender roles of the past.
Okay.
Like we don't put as heavy emphasis on all of the traditions for burying our dead. But some things work in her favor, like the passivity. But totally forgot where I was going with that. Anyway, biased from person of today.
This is related to this question. Do you think Homer is criticizing her for that? You're able to learn from Homer's presentation that she is too weak. You think you're able to learn from Homer's presentation that she's too weak. But that's not how Homer sees it. Or do you think Homer sees it? So in a way he's a proto-feminist because he's criticizing her for being too weak and she should be stronger. I mean, I don't know. That's assuming that we set aside all the evidence that she's very clever and strong. But if she is weak and she's not cold, heroic, or she's not considered powerful, and someone else, Achilles, is considered powerful, right? Is that, and Homer can see that, and therefore he's, she should be more powerful. Women should be more powerful, but they're, what's with them? They should be. They should get stronger. Do you get that sense from Homer, or do you get the sense that he is saying, well, of course she's weak, and women are supposed to be weak, and.
Okay, wait. So you're asking.
Yeah. So you've learned. So you're reading this from home. Yeah. If you read, it's not a 21st century person that you're reading. You didn't read a 21st century analysis of Penelope. You read a Homer who's conveying his thoughts about Penelope. But somehow, even though Homer is biased, and for him that doesn't seem strange that women are weak, you're able to learn from Homer that she's weak. So you're not using Homer's perspective, or you think Homer considers her blamably weak?
I don't think Homer considers her blamably weak, just because of everything in the time period, where it's like it's okay for women to be really passive. It's okay for them to mourn for a long time, but to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole. There's a time window here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even think he's criticizing her that much. He's just
No.
at the end. If you could assume that he's like speaking through Agamemnon, he's actually praising her at the end of the epic. He finds her loyalty and her devotion to Odysseus is really inspirational, very good at the time. Yeah, the weakness is kind of a side effect.
So therefore you're using Homer, as you said, for your 21st century purposes, rather than learning from his judgment. You disagree with his judgment, you might say. You disagree with Homer about who she is and whether who she is good or not. Homer thinks she's good. You think she's bad.
I don't think she's bad.
So
I don't.
Steve, yeah.
Good and bad are.
Yeah,
not good.
to oversimplify, yeah.
Maybe we can have one more comment before we get to Professor Berger, and I'm going to call on this person, but I need to say who he is. I know Alex Luminowski wanted to say something.
Yes.
Alex is currently in his fifth year of graduate school at Tulane University,
Time to graduate.
where he's writing soon his doctoral dissertation on the Roman poet and philosopher Lucretius. And I only mention him because Alex was a student here at Roosevelt University honors program. And Alex, I'll just mention in passing, did major in philosophy.
And would that I had had such an opportunity as this in my time here.
That's right. And Alex has returned to us, and we're writing his dissertation. He's going to be teaching some classes at Roosevelt, but the sort of courses that the primary texts.
Already last spring.
Last spring.
And this coming spring. Yes, all right, so enough about me.
Alex.
Thank you. Well, I had two questions, but we only have time for one, and we took up most of that time praising me, so I'll keep it short. I wonder, when it comes to sort of women in Homer, you make the nice comparison of Penelope and Clytemnestra. I wonder if we could make a sort of another comparison of two women that really have more to do with Odysseus, which is Penelope and Athena, both of whom are incredibly important to what he's able to do, what sort of doors are open to him throughout his story. So I wonder, how do you? I sort of just wonder, in this sort of broad analysis of what's Homer saying about women, or what's Homer saying about society, or what's Homer saying about political strength and weakness relative among the characters, or whatever. How could we? I mean, this is a very loose question. Can we add Athena to the mix here and say Penelope is stuck in a bad situation and maybe handles it well, maybe doesn't, right? That's for the reader to sort of figure out.
Sure.
Women can be goddesses.
But women can also be goddesses, and women can also be the goddesses that like help Odysseus fool everyone all the time. And I don't know. I just wonder, what was your impression of Athena when you read it, and were you inspired by her character, whereas you were depressed by Penelope?
The thing with Athena is, when she was described throughout the entire epic, it was never on really feminine terms. It was always Athena's powerful, Athena's intelligent. She's going out there and actively improving things, whereas Penelope is just kind of hanging on. That's what I got from Athena. Is she was always described as almost masculine as a guy. Because she appeared to Odysseus as a guy one time. Yeah.
Oh yeah, she does.
Yeah.
She appears
So,
in the form of mentors.
So, in comparison with her and Penelope, I almost didn't see Athena as female, I guess. If you could argue that the entities of the Greek mythology, the gender means nothing to them. You can be whatever. You could be a donkey. I don't know. But the cool thing with Athena was she was able to really actively help Odysseus. She was able to, I can't even think of an example off the top of my head, but she was able to, like I said, actively help him.
Mist that she casts upon
Right.
him when he was unscathed.
She's doing stuff. She's improving things, and Penelope is just at her house trying to bide time.
Well, she's not a goddess.
Yeah.
She's not a goddess.
Correct. So it's difficult to compare them.
Oh, wait, is there time for a follow-up before?
Very,
A very brief one. A very brief one.
Tiny follow-up.
If Penelope had made different choices in the poem, and Homer had described her in different terms, and she was a strong female character, would you have gotten the same impression of her as you got of Athena, or is there a sort of an in-between of strong woman that doesn't also appear as a man sometimes and wear armor?
So is there a middle ground?
Yeah, we wouldn't make the mistake of saying a strong Penelope would be just the same as she would be not even a woman anymore. I mean, how would she have appeared in a better light?
Well, she wouldn't have had that whole objectification trophy thing going on for her, and that would have rerouted the entire paper. There probably wouldn't have, the entire Odyssey, there wouldn't have been the suitors as much, trying to win her over, because if they win Penelope over, then they're in charge of Ithaca. Right now, she's kind of holding down the fort. So if she was really powerful, then she would have been able to either directly expel them or done something productive with her time. With the weakness, it really drives the whole poem because Odysseus keeps trying to get back to her, reinstate his power. He wants his epic, he wants his trophy wife, and if she wasn't trophy wife, it would have just been totally different. Maybe she would have been the one out having an adventure instead of Odysseus.
Okay, so this seems to be a good time to turn to Professor Virgo, who I'm sure
You've all said it already. Honestly. Well, first of all, I want to say your paper and all of these papers are incredibly impressive to me.
Thank
they
you.
really are. I can't believe you're registered as freshmen. I think they're like graduate student papers, maybe a few more Shakespeare literature or something. Anyway, excellent.
Yeah, what are you doing?
And then I really do mean, you've already kind of said the main thing I want to focus on, that if we start from the end, I think you have a really interesting, seems to me really compelling account of Penelope's devious strength, her intelligence, her devious strength, the situation she's in, given this, the role of women in the society, and what she can accomplish. And I think, to me, this would have been a brilliant paper if, what I would have liked to see is everything you do in the first 5 pages or so, interesting observations, you're noting things in the text, but they all are subject to reinterpretation once you get to what you say at the end.
Yeah.
That since she couldn't overpower them physically, she had to manipulate them. Her son was too young, she had to hold them off until her son Telemachus is old enough to take over. Using her cleverness, she's able to pit the suitors against each other. That's brilliant. She had no choice but to bide her time by leaving the suitors with individual promises. Brilliant. Sending out separate messages. She ensured her son's safety. The unweaving of the thing. Exploiting their faith in the gods, so forth. Are there more? Keeping the suitors at bay. Everything you say is so important and insightful. And to me, it's a compelling case for what she's doing given her situation. And I think an interesting analysis someone might possibly do is develop all these things that seem to be weakness, and then allow us to rethink them once we see what she's really up to. What is her strategy? And in a way, the turnaround, or the way I think that the moment where you start rethinking the whole picture is the recognition, the whole extended recognition scene with Odysseus. I mean, I think a very strong case can be made. She knows who it is. There are so many indications, but she doesn't really know what person he's become, what her own relation to him will be. And she's somehow been so successful in staying in control for 20 years, she will also be giving up something now. And so that whole scene, I think, makes you, and for example, what you're calling the trophy wife, that she's going to put herself up for, the contest of the bow, and she'll be the prize. That's her idea. And she tells it to, she announces it. She's in a way, I would try to make the case, consider it, we can debate it at some point, but I think she is setting in motion. I mean, of course, Athena has been involved. Odysseus is planning. He's involved Telemachus already. He will involve Eumaeus. They all have their own angle on how this destruction of the suitors will take place. But in a certain way, Penelope is the one who sets it in motion with this contest of the bow. And she's revealed so much to Odysseus through her interpretation of the dream and so on. So there's an amazing amount of subtle control that you could make a case, I don't want to say more important than Odysseus or something like that, but she's so much his partner. She's so cunning and so clever, and so much a counterpart of the female counterpart to Odysseus. And the way I would put what you're saying about 20th century and so on, 21st century, I think great thinkers, great authors are all aware, to my mind they're all aware, including, I'm interested in this in the Bible these days, they're all aware of the tension between what we can call convention and nature. What is the case by convention, the sort of rules of the game in your society? And what are the natural strengths and weaknesses of human beings? So she's operating with certain conventions, as I think you spell out very nicely, really nicely, what the conventions of the society are, that she has to operate within those. But boy, is she exploiting them. She's in full control, I would say, exploiting all the conventions of her society. And Homer is showing the natural strength of this character, and what a beautiful counterpart to Odysseus it is. maybe like one little thing along the way. Yeah, it's kind of bothersome. We'll come to this later, I think in the other paper too, that Odysseus is hanging out for 7 years, 1 year, with these beautiful goddesses and stuff. But it's not, I want to look again, your paper made me want to look again. I didn't have time to, at what he actually does tell her. I'm not sure he tells her everything, You're bothered that she accepts all these affairs, etc. I'm not sure he tells her everything. And she's heard some of it already from Telemachus' report and so on. This is all being, let me put it this way, Homer is a genius, I think, at speeches, this is Plato's words, speeches adjusted to souls, or telling the speech that's appropriate to that character. So you also have to look back at each of your pieces of evidence for her weakness, I would say. Look back again and see, where do we get it from, who's speaking to whom, and why are they telling the story the way they do? And things come out rather differently, I think, when you do that. So, I don't know, you have all the material here for an analysis that I happen to love about Penelope. But I know you're going in a different direction, but I think you're kind of torn in 2 directions.
Yeah, that was rough. I had to pick one, and it was like, well, where's the more evidence?
If you hadn't had your title,
Title.
I would have thought, oh yeah, this is brilliant. She's showing all the things that would make you think she's weak, and then overturning it and how stupid. Yeah.
If I may add one thing to what Professor Berger said, it really gets to the gist of the question that I asked at the outset. That is, I think it's instructive that the encomium, the hymn in favor of Penelope, and the form that it takes about her conventional virtue comes from Agamemnon. And one would expect it to come from Agamemnon because he's where he is, because Clytemnestra wasn't Penelope. So he sees what he would have liked to have found in Clytemnestra. Let her just be loyal to me and allow me to come home with Cassandra, after whom my cat, Cassie, famous Cassie, who occupied an important place in class, in his name. So that's a case in which, as Professor Berger is suggesting, you always have to look in these ancient works, who's saying what to whom, and what are the circumstances, and filter one's analysis through that kind of lens.
That's a good one.
Yeah, the other, just to add on to this, is I think one thing that might be a kind of a handhold in your paper for rethinking some of this stuff is to consider what you rightly point out, a lot of Penelope's actions, you call them passive, and I wonder if thinking about them in terms of stillness rather than passivity might be helpful. That is, and two thoughts are here. One, you have to ask, what activity could she have engaged in? What would a more active Penelope have done that would have generated as good a result as this Penelope that we have? Secondly, a part of that good result is that things in Ithaca have been completely frozen. We learn in book 2 they haven't had a political assembly in 20 years, almost 19 years. So maybe it takes great effort to keep things that still, which would make Penelope still, a lot of the things you describe would be applied to her, but not from a perspective of passivity, but from the incredible energy and brilliance it takes to make things